little while ago, I read a book that I rather enjoyed called The Rise and the Fall of the Bible by a man named Hespeler. Basically, the book was a reflection on the place, the position of this book, the Bible, within our society. And in this book, Hespeler reflects on a number of rather interesting statistics. For example, he notes that in a number of surveys, 66%, two-thirds of Americans will say that they believe that the Bible contains within it all or most of the answers to life's most basic questions. 66%. I don't imagine numbers are quite that high in Canada, but I'm sure that even in Canada, a healthy majority of Canadians would say something quite similar about the Bible. But here's the puzzling part. You go back to those people and ask them how many of them actually read it. 28% of them will admit that they rarely or never read the Bible. So there's a whole lot of people out there who think all the answers are in there, but don't actually open up the book to find them. Here's another puzzling statistic. In the year 2007, 25 million Bibles were sold in the United States. Brought in for the Bible publishers $770 million in revenue. That was a 26% increase over 2 years previously when it brought in $609 million. 2008, remember 2008, an economic crisis? Well, in 2008, revenues from Bible sales rose to $835.5 million. So, very clearly, Bible sales are going nowhere but up. They're selling like hotcakes. But during that same period of time, the numbers of people who admit that they don't ever read the Bible have only increased. And understanding and knowledge of what's actually in the Bible has continued to decrease. So it seems, actually, that the more Bibles people have, the less they actually read them. Now, Beale in the book explains maybe one reason for why this happens. And he says it probably has something to do with the consumer society that we live in. Because, you see, we have a tendency in our Western society, whenever something happens, whenever we want to change our life, our first impulse is to go shopping. Right? So, for example, say someone makes a vow to improve their health. I want to be healthier. What's the first thing they do? They go out and buy something. They buy a membership at a gym. They buy an expensive treadmill, workout clothes, right? And as soon as they put that credit card back in their wallet, they say, wow, I have done something good for my health. Then what happens? They don't go to the gym. The treadmill ends up in the closet. The workout clothes in the attic. But it doesn't matter because they feel like they have done something because they went out and bought something. That's how we tend to think. We deal with whatever's going on in our life. The natural response we seem to have is, let's go shopping. Well, it's the same thing with spiritual life. Somebody decides that it's time to make a change in their spiritual life, to improve their spiritual life. Their first impulse is, okay, I got to buy something. Well, going and buying a Bible, it's kind of an obvious choice, right? So people go out and they buy a Bible. They don't actually read it, but that doesn't matter because the fact that they bought something means that they have made a step towards better spiritual health. Just this weird way we have of thinking in Western society. So I think that's part of what's going on. But I think there's also another deeper problem. And it actually has to do with that expectation that people have. That the Bible, this book, has all these answers, all these clear answers to all the basic questions of our life, and they're just sitting there waiting to jump out at us. when we open up the pages. Because you see, when people have that expectation and they open up the Bible, what do they find? They find stories of wandering nomads, and wild-eyed prophets, and kings, and princes, and judges, and patriarchs, and young struggling churches. Wonderful stories, really. It's not entirely clear, certainly not obvious, what those stories really have to do with the problems I have to face. It doesn't just click like that. You open up this book and you find these laws and rules and commandments that were clearly written for a society or a kingdom very different from our own. It's not immediately clear exactly how those things apply to our time and our place. So people have this expectation, all those answers are there, they open the book, the answers aren't there. They feel frustrated. They feel like they're doing it wrong, that they're not smart enough, and it makes them feel bad. Well, is it any wonder that they just close the book and put it off to the side until maybe they buy another one, and then they do the same thing? Now, I want to be clear, I'm not trying to suggest that there aren't any answers in the Bible. I know there are answers there. The Lord knows that I've found enough of my own over many years of study and reading. But at the same time, I can hardly say that those answers have always been clear and unambiguous, that they have come easily. And I got to say that some of the answers that I found have really only led to more questions. I mean, sure, Moses, thou shalt not kill. Pretty straight, pretty clear, you know? Until you start thinking about it. You say, yeah, but what about cases of really bad crimes that have been committed? What then? What about when you face an enemy in war? What about if you have to choose between one life and another? Say between an unborn child and its mother, or some deaths worse than others. And you know, people who take this book really seriously have seriously disagreed on the answers to those kinds of questions. So yeah, you can't really say that the answers just jump off the page. And sometimes the answers just aren't there. I don't know if this comes as a shock to hear from someone, a leader in the Christian community, but I don't think I have all the answers. And I readily admit that I still got lots of questions and that I have lots of doubts, and some of the answers that I find really don't satisfy. I do not know why this couple that I know, why their beautiful little daughter got cancer and died. I don't know. I don't know why God is so powerful and omniscient that so much injustice continues in this world. And I don't know how they get the caramel inside the caramel bar. I just don't know. I don't have all the answers. And how do you live in Christ when you don't have the answers? And when maybe you have more doubts than you have faith? What then? Well, fortunately, in our gospel reading this morning, we have this incredible story of some people who struggle with those very issues. First of all, we have the disciples. Poor disciples. I mean, here they are. They have been with Jesus a long time. They've learned so much from him. And he even told them that he has given them power and authority to heal the sick, to cast out demons, to cleanse the lepers. And here they're faced with a boy who's got serious problems. Now, we would probably diagnose this boy, if we were experts, I imagine it's some sort of form of epilepsy. Of course, according to the understanding of of the time, the only way they could interpret it was that he was possessed by some demon. But either way, this guy was in deep trouble. And the disciples, when they're faced with this really serious problem, they don't know what to do. And I think a big part of the problem is this: they feel like they should know. They feel after all this time, everything they've been through with Jesus, they should know what to do. And it scares them that they don't. And I suspect that because of that, they kind of tried to fake it. You know, they tried to pretend that they knew what they're doing. And you know what happens when people pretend like they know what they're doing when they really don't? Ask any wife whose husband swore up and down that he knew how to fix the plumbing. Ask this 80-something-year-old woman who was sure that she knew how to fix a fresco in a church. People who really don't know what they're doing and yet try to pretend they don't have this way of really messing things up. And I think that's what the disciples did. So I think the first lesson we need to learn from them is maybe this: when you don't have the answers, when you have too many questions, when the doubts are overcoming you, don't try and hide it. Be real. And admit where you are and what you're struggling with. And I know maybe the tendency sometimes is to be, let's, be arrogant and go and say, well, I got all the answers, I got it all figured out. When we don't. And I know we've got all these incredible truths. And they're so important to us, and they're so precious to us, and they guide us. That shouldn't make us arrogant. Because we understand so little of it, and what we do, we use so miserly. An attitude of humility is going to go a long, long way. That's the disciples. Then we have the Father. His problem is basically doubt. And it's kind of hard not to blame him, because here he is, he's got this serious problem with his son. Nobody's been able to help him. He comes to these disciples with hope. They let him down by pretending they know what they're doing when they really don't. And when he finally gets to Jesus, he's kind of given up. And all he can say to Jesus is this: if you are able, maybe you could do something. Have pity on us and help us. And Jesus replies to that. He replies to that, if you are able bit, because you see, Jesus has come to communicate to the world that it's better to put your trust in God. That if you put your trust in God, you will not be left lacking. That it's better not to dwell on those questions and those doubts and just trust in God. So Jesus comes back and says, if you are able, all things can be done for the one who believes. Now I want to be clear, when Jesus says that, and he's absolutely right, of course, but when Jesus says that, he's not trying to get this Father to believe certain things about God. This is a distinction that we sometimes miss. Because we sometimes think that faith is all about believing certain things about God, or believing certain things about Jesus. But you see, Jesus at this point could care less whether this Father believes in a 6-day creation story, whether this Father believes in some particular theory of atonement, or whether he accepts the doctrine of immaculate conception. Jesus doesn't care about that stuff. He has only one concern. He wants to know whether or not This man will trust him, and so will he trust in God. That's all it is. And see, the problem is that that kind of trust doesn't come easy for us. Why? Because we've all been burned. I mean, who among us has not been in that position where you trusted someone and they let you down? Maybe seriously. It could have been your parent, could have been your sibling, could have been a lover, could have been a friend. Whoever it was, you trusted someone, put yourself in their hands, and they disappointed you. And when that happens, it just gets harder and harder to put your trust in somebody else. Some of us, it's happened to us a lot. So we find it hard to trust in God. That's where this man is. You know, he's tried, he's trusted, and people have let him down. The disciples have let him down. He's having a hard time trusting you. And that's where we often are too. But the Father, he just expresses that so perfectly, so wonderfully. He says, I do believe. Help my unbelief. That's where we are. It's not that we don't believe, it's just that we really need some help putting that trust in God. Now, this point, this could have been the end of the story, right? Because Jesus, having received this confession of lack of faith, Jesus could have just turned around and said, oh well, what can you do? People aren't going to trust. But Jesus doesn't do that. Instead, Jesus has compassion and he heals that sick child. Now, there's a suggestion in the stories that's told that one of the reasons, at least why he does that, is because there's a crowd forming, there's lots of people. Jesus doesn't want to make a big scene, and so he wants to get this over with. And that's part of it, but it's not the whole story. Jesus has compassion and heals that child because he knows that God's faithfulness is bigger and better than that man's failure to trust. And he knows that God's grace is bigger than all of that man's failings. And this is the ultimate answer to that question. Well, how do we live in Christ when we don't have all the answers? And when we have questions, and when we have doubts? The real answer is this, that all of our doubts, and all of our questions, and all of our problems, and our failings and shortcomings, they are met by God's grace. And if they weren't, we would have no hope. But they are. Praise be to God. The end of the story, the disciples are feeling kind of sheepish. They know they failed. They have fallen short. They call Jesus over on the side and they say to him, well, why did we mess up? Why did we fail? Why couldn't we cast it out? Now Jesus, I suspect at this point, was kind of frustrated with his disciples. But he doesn't answer them with anger. He has compassion on them as well. And he turns to them and he says, well, this kind can only come out with prayer. And I think that that answer is not just an answer for that particular situation. It is an answer for whenever you find yourself in the position where you don't have the answers, where the questions are too much, where the doubts overwhelm. Why not start with prayer? Why not come to God and in all honesty confess where you are and say, no, I don't know, and I don't have the answers, God, and I have these doubts. I do believe. You say like the Father, but I need help with the things I don't believe. You think God has trouble with a prayer like that? He doesn't. God finds that kind of honesty refreshing. And he may have just been waiting with bated breath for you to pray just that very thing. For when you go and you ask for help, confessing your weakness, God is always there to respond. Just give him a try. You will see. Will you take a few moments in silence?